Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So in this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm delighted to be welcoming Bridget Farrands and Ian Hardie. Bridget transitioned from investment and retail banking into executive consulting and coaching, focusing on leadership transitions, cultural change, and identity work, co-authoring Leadership Transitions and Lost in Transition. Ian Hardie has moved through manufacturing, IT, education at London Business School, luxury conglomerates like LVMH and Sephora Global, into executive coaching and consulting. He guides leaders through complex organizational change and learning transformation. Bridget, Ian, it's a delight to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Delighted to be here.
Likewise, great to be with you.
And it's worth mentioning that both of them are old friends and colleagues of Antoine. So let's get straight into the usual way we start, which is looking at the nature and the why of your careers. You both shifted within and ultimately from long-standing careers. Bridget from banking, Ian from luxury retail and academia. How did you approach redefining your leadership identity during those transitions, and which strategies overlapped?
One of the things that helped me was that I became pregnant with my first of 3 children, and that was itself a new identity. I mean, it's hardly a commercial identity to say I'm a new mother, but it did help me to sort of break, to some extent, the connection. And also, when I'd had my first child, I thought, this is wonderful to have a baby, but it is definitely not enough intellectually. So I need to do more than just be a mother. So I I trained as a therapist because it was something I could do in the evenings when my husband came home and looked after the baby. There was a career break. And I think that certainly helped. And so I then trained as initially a marital and family therapist. And so that was overlapping very much with my identity as a mother. So there wasn't a huge shift, but I think what it did was to help me connect with my organizational life and the work that I'd done there. I'd always thought, but probably not this strongly, that leaders have to first and foremost be human before they are just a pair of hands, before they do stuff. I mean, they have to make stuff happen, of course, but it really helped me think about and then develop my own ideas about how leaders need to have far more rounded identities than just people who made lots of money and satisfied shareholders. But there's a lot more to it than that. And so that combination was very helpful in enabling me to shift my identity into becoming a consultant. And I became a coach, although it didn't exist then as a word or as a practice. It used to be, when you've got a minute, Bridget, could you come and have a chat with me? That was usually what coaching happened as. I think it helped certainly to create a kind of new identity for myself, actually.
Beautiful. It sounds somewhat serendipitous and somewhat designed, and probably the balance between the two shifted as time went on. But how beautifully it did indeed end up showing up in the work you continued to do.
Yes, and gave me something interesting for my brain to be occupied with, other than 3-month-old child and then a second child and a third child, which was a saving for me, actually. They are adorable. I love them deeply. And then, as small people, not hugely intellectually exciting and satisfying, but emotionally hugely exciting.
And no woman ever knows how she's going to feel or want to be once she's given birth to her first child. There is no doubt of that. Ian, clearly you did not define whatever identity shifts you went through giving birth, but please do give us your version of how the identity shifts were going on.
Nearly every time I speak with Bridget, we find something of a point of connection. I have to say that the birth of my second child, not myself, my wife did that, was a significant moment because I had to move from having a job that enabled me to travel all the time to a job where I had to be close to home. And by coincidence or blessing, I found myself moving to the local university, which was the University of North London. And that was the entry point to enable me to then move to London Business School. So it was a personal point of difference. But then I found myself constrained and contained at the University of North London, and I wanted to go somewhere bigger and more challenging. So just like Bridget, I wanted a little bit more intellectually. And so I went to London Business School, which was then meaning that I was now doing an international job. I was traveling again, which was a strain for the family. I was not an academic at London Business School, so I was a bit of an outsider, but I felt I had a role to play. And funny enough, people often said, well, surely London Business School and LVMH are very different. They're not. They're brands. They have creatives. They have faculty members. There's a lot about communication, and it's a lot about customers or students. So there's lots of similarities. When I worked to LVMH, again, I wasn't a creative. And this time, I wasn't French. So that sort of, as an outsider, has been something I think that I've carried through. And being comfortable as an outsider is something which is quite handy if you then become an independent consultant. So you're quite comfortable to be the outsider because that enables you to not feel left out, but you're in, but you're comfortable being the outsider. So when I thought about your question in terms of identity, I think I've always seen myself slightly as the outsider who's always pushing to be a little bit more inside, to have a little bit more influence, get people to listen, which of course is difficult if you don't speak the language in France. But I became absolutely fluent in body language. So that's the key thing for me in that identity, is to be slightly an outsider and to maintain that.
Sounds like a case to some extent of fitting in everywhere, finding a way to fit in everywhere, but not quite belonging anywhere and using that to your advantage.
I love to work for an organization like London Business School, like LVMH, where you were proud to belong. But I always knew there was a sort of a containment to my position within that. A little bit like those people who are expats in Japan. You can be absolutely in love with Japan, but you will never be Japanese. It's that sense of outsiderness, but still belonging and enjoying being part of the bigger picture.
Lovely distinction. Thank you. Well, you've both worked for and with all kinds of very impressive organizations, globally recognized brands. You've advised them on leadership stuff, but what have you learned from other leaders within these organizations? What were the standout leadership lessons that you might really still be influenced by and holding on to as you've gone through the rest of your careers and lives?
Almost always, somewhere, my response comes back to who the person is that I'm actually working with. There must be something in that. These aren't necessarily a very wide range of people. I have to say, usually men, because very senior leaders in most organizations have for a long time been male. I'm glad to see it slowly changing, not fast enough for you, but anyway, it is. And so some of them have been extremely likable. And I think what I've had to do is distinguish between, I really like you, I like working with you, we do great work together, and actually thinking about, but yes, how are you as a leader? Because of course in coaching, that's often what needs to be addressed. So I think if I was to condense all of that experience, it would be that who you are matters as much as what you do. It's not secondary. I think it needs to be equal first. And working with people and getting the best from them, actually, which is what leadership ought to be about. I mean, as well as all the other achievements it needs to cover. But I think needs leaders to sort of show their humanness, which includes a number of things that coaching, I think, often addresses, which is acknowledging their weaknesses and finding ways to acknowledge that, then realizing they can't know the answers to every question that gets posed because it's such a complex and complicated world. To show their vulnerability really is a way to show their humanness. And when they are human, rather than, not sure what the opposite would be, but some sort of task machine, that if they don't know the answers to every question, they do show their vulnerability and their willingness to be open to what other people think. This means that they, I think, attract good followership. I think there's a lot of other things that need to go into standout leadership lessons, as you called it. But for me, it is how hard sometimes it is to show that humanness. And some cultures are better at allowing it than others. Allowed to mention one, I've worked a lot with IKEA, and I think IKEA is a place which very actively and openly supports people being human rather than people being task achievers only. It's really around that emphasis on being who you are truthfully. And I think the context that has generally existed, I think in a lot of cultures, is a move from kind of individual authority to the value of a much more collective empowerment, to collectively empower, to lead a collective empowerment culture does mean that you have to yourself live what that means. And that means you can yourself be empowered by others, more junior than you maybe, or certainly not of the same rank, that you can be open to a number of influences.
I love that distinction that you're alluding to, that empowerment can come through inspiration, not just through hierarchy or the giving of power in an open and classical way, but that power comes from all kinds of different energies, and those sometimes come from unexpected places.
Not just about that. I think it's very much about how the leader shows up.
Yes.
In that purpose of a more collective empowerment.
Ian, what's your take on this?
Life is all about learning. And I've just learned that I should not let Bridget answer every question first because she always has the best answers, you see. So it's not fair. Is that she takes so I need to jump in at some point.
He's a lovely colleague. Isn't he a lovely colleague?
Isn't he wonderful?
I tried to focus on standout leadership and struck by what Bridget said. It not so much in terms of the people I loved working for, but the ones that I thought were most effective and enabled the team and the organization to really succeed. One is absolutely treating individuals as individuals and making the most of their difference. And many people talk about diversity, but absolutely seeing them as individuals, working on what motivates and inspires an individual, and then using that to drive the team. The second is, for me, consistency. Not only consistency of the way that you treat people, but consistency of the way you treat people in line with the brand and the DNA and the culture of the organization. Because if you stand out too much, you just can't connect. So you have to find a place where your style and approach fits the style and approach of the organization. Number 3, I'll never forget this phrase. Someone else said it, one of the senior leaders at LVMH. Never ask people to do what you wouldn't do yourself. In fact, the leader who came up with that, his example was, when I was in the army, we were parachuting, I jumped first. I'm not sure that is quite the metaphor I had in mind, but it is about making sure that you're prepared to do what you ask others to do. The final one for me is very much about behavior over words. And words are key, communication is key, but it is what you do, the way you treat people, as much as the words that you say. And that is absolutely about setting standards. And if you can maintain those standards, then it's fair to ask other people to push themselves to raise their standards as well. So that's a 4 or 5 for me as a little mix of standout, challenging lessons because they're not easy to do.
Definitely not. Well, Ian, thank you. And I'm going to get to you first for this next question. You champion technology-enabled pull learning, as you call it. Bridget, you see personal identity as central to leadership. What's one unexpected discovery you each made when implementing these in real life and real world leadership translations?
I think the phrase I often use is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so that's what I mean by pull learning, is you really need to engage the learners in the topic, in the challenge, in order for them to really want to learn. And if they haven't got that desire to engage. So one of the things that's really surprised me in this journey of leading leadership development is how important branding and marketing as a set of skills are. Not in a fluff promotional way, but working out how you market your leadership lessons, your opportunity to learn in such a way that it really builds desire in the heart and the head of the learner, that they will engage. And some of the people I've seen lead some of the best, particularly internal corporate universities, are those people who really get the learning brand, the brand of their organization, that just people say, I want to come, I want to learn, I want to be part of this, I can see how it works. And I don't mean to diminish it by saying it's marketing. It is absolutely about connecting with those customers, working out what it is will work for them, and getting that message across. So that's why I focus on this word pull. If your learners don't want it, they're not going to take it. And there's nothing worse than sort of putting a great meal on the table and no one eating it. It's that desire to learn which is at the heart of success.
I love that. I love that. Thank you, Ian. Bridget, how about you?
I'm going to use a very early experience in my working life when I first met Ian and we started working together. I can't put a number of years on this because I just can't work it out, but it was quite a time ago. And we were working on developing a program for senior leaders in LVMH. And I can remember having a meeting with Ian and producing a set of slides because I'd been asked to put an initial design together. When I showed them to Ian, my experience was that none of it was right. There was a lot to criticize and there was a lot that needed to change. And I could remember thinking, I'm not sure we are going to have much time working well together. I mean, it proved to be years and years and it was great. But I went home after that meeting and I was talking to my husband about this. And he said, well, he sounds very useful for you because you are a bit woolly sometimes, aren't you? And so he must be really helpful if he's prepared to really take you to task on how you describe things and design something for his organization. And that moment was really one of those moments of, right, so this is what I am trying to help other people do, learn from what their experience is. And even if it's not always comfortable or particularly enjoyable, there's a lot to be learned. And I have to say, one of the things I learned from Ian, a huge lesson, is that I can be creative and I can still be accurate and concise and disciplined in how I, in this case, design a program and which we ended up collaborating very closely on. So it's something about see opportunities, often when they're a little bit uncomfortable, as a time where there is a discovery about something to do with, in this case, my leadership in running a program, which Ian was very involved in, of course. But ever since, I have found myself on different occasions thinking, what would Ian say? Better make that a bit more precise. It has been marvelous, but at the time, it stood out for me as I don't think he and I are ever going to manage to work together. How wrong I was.
How wonderful to have been that wrong. Fantastic. Let's get very practical now. For our listeners, whether they're stepping into a new role or they're navigating their own version of change in whatever their context is, what's one practical tool or mindset from each of your arsenals that they could actually apply this week? They get off the podcast, they can go out there and do it. What would they be?
For me personally, I had a tricky transition to move from LBS to LVMH and from LVMH to Sephora. And I was able to draw on the work of her book to enable that to be a smoother transition than it would have been. So kudos for that. The thing that we've been working on most recently is about a transition that's not spoken about quite so often. And that's the transition you make when you stop full-time work and then move into this new environment, which may be in sometimes retirement, it may be partial retirement, and for some people it's just as busy, but they haven't got one employer. And so we've been looking at this, and we've come up with a little framework that we put together, which we call CHIPS. And probably if I do a couple of the letters, Bridget can do a couple of others. And we just find it works for this, but also for a number of other things that you can get involved in. And the C for CHIPS is about context, really encouraging people to take a broad and honest and deep view of the reality of their context. What is their current context, particularly at this time of moving out of full-time employment? Can you afford to stop? Do you have responsibilities for children or for their grandparents or for your own parents? And really pushing people to take that holistic view of your context, which works also for career moves, I have to say. The H is for hopes. Take a little time to sit back, work out what you hope this next phase would be, and then use that. And this isn't a linear framework. You come backwards and forwards through the cycle of it. But so hopes is the second one. I'll say a little bit about I, which is identity. So getting that comfort with the new identity that you've got when you are no longer the CEO or the chief marketing officer. We always know we have a challenging conversation when we ask someone, tell me what you do now. And the first thing they say is, I was the CEO. Our question is, what do you do now? But identity is something that Bridget knows a lot more about than me. So I'll let you say a little bit about identity and pick up the other two letters, Bridget.
Thanks, Ian.
Our identity shifts throughout our lives, but when you're in a long-term career where you get given a title, you sort of take that on. But of course, people's identity, they get divorced, they get remarried, they become parents. Those are all different forms of identity. I think that what we're going to explore here is, what is your identity when you no longer have a title that is being given to you? The P is purpose, and it's connected. All of these are very connected, that now that you're not set objectives by an organization or by your line manager, what purpose do you want to have in your life now? And of course, think very widely about that. Think broadly, widely. And the S of CHIPS stands for strategies, because we want to be very practical and offer people ideas about how they could set about planning, organizing, and living successfully, and we would hope enjoyably, this phase of their life, which is we call the post-career career.
The challenging thing is, as we shared this with people, I was with a colleague, an ex-colleague, the other night, and I was talking him through this work we're doing. He said, it's a great idea, except I've got bad news for you. It works in careers as well as post-career. So he was using it to think about the next move he made. I took it as a compliment, but I'm not entirely sure he meant it as such. But yeah, so CHIPS is this idea of the post-career playbook. It probably works if it's not a post-career as well.
Let's move on and talk about your book, Bridget, Lost in Transition, which is about our favorite topic of career transitions. What motivated you to write the book? And was there a pivotal moment, either your own or observing others, when you realized that this topic really needed to be addressed?
There was, at the time, a coincidence where I was being asked to coach 3 different people who were taking up in different organizations the role of CEO. It was quite a coincidence that they all kind of came together. And it was the presence of all 3 in my coaching portfolio, let's say, which made me acknowledge that this role was unique. I mean, there are not usually lots of CEOs. I mean, LVMH aside, but they're CEOs of individual brands. There are not usually multiple CEOs. And therefore, it made me realize that this is a unique role, and it will have very specific needs and issues, which are just not the usual managerial ones, to be that primary a leader. So it was when I kind of acknowledged this and my own lack of experience, really, of working at this level, that I started to research, which is what I tend to do when I don't know something. I just initiate some kind of action research. I researched what it meant to undertake the role successfully. And from then, I developed an approach with each of these people, which was initially quite experimental, I have to say, but which seemed to work well enough for them to feel that they were getting more their feet under the desk, so to speak. And that really gave rise to the book and much further research, where we decided that we would want to work with the teams of each of these people. Because when a new leader comes in, it's a big shift for the team that they lead to also understand, well, what's going to be different now? What does he or she want from me? How are we going to work together? So there's a lot of uncertainty about that. And we did a year of researching teams that were having new leaders in place, because we wanted it not just to be about the individual, but about the system, about teams, about the broader setting of the organization. That's kind of what triggered it. And then we started testing these ideas out. We worked a lot with the Home Office and other government departments that were undergoing a lot of change. They said, "Oh, you can come and help us." So marvelously, not only did I have a chance to try out some ideas on 3 unsuspecting new CEOs, but we also had a chance to try out our ideas within different government teams, government departments, and test out and perfect it. And that's what went into the book, actually. We wanted it to be practical always. So we worked out, well, what exercises could people do that would help them take charge in this or manage this situation differently, better. And so the book also contains exercises that everyone is free to use wherever they want, however they want.
I want to pick up on the different things that emerged in the book, some of which sound serendipitous, some of them a bit more structured and organized, and that is the nature, I think, of approaching a new topic like this, or a topic in a new way. You introduced in the book a 3-phase framework: arriving, surviving, and thriving, which are beautiful titles, not least because they're so self-explanatory and open, full of possibilities. What surprised you the most when you discovered this structure, and how did it reshape your understanding of transitions? And Ian, how has this thinking influenced the way you work these days?
We came up with this with a huge body of research, and we've had so much information. I've kept out of nostalgia all the files that I created, literal files, not computer files. And there are about 10 of them. They're, at least 3 inches thick each. So it's a huge mass of information. Going through that, it came out to us, really. I think all of that research spoke to us and said, yes, distinct things happen when people arrive. They've got to get on top of meeting and knowing the organization, and they've got to get to know the role from the inside. That was clearly, this is all about arriving. And then we started to realize that people had to start winning the right to lead, or getting the credibility to lead, through what they actually did and how they did it. So the surviving phase we called standing up and standing out. So what do you stand up for? And also, how do you stand out as the appropriate best leader that you could be? So we then realized we had to help people find out what they wanted their leadership to stand for, what we call where is your true north as a leader. And then thriving was mining your experience, because by now we said a transition into a new role takes 9 to 14 months. It is absolutely not 100 days. How do you use new perspectives to adapt how you lead? How do you yourself shift? A bit like my experience of meeting Ian, who said, well, this isn't accurate, this isn't precise enough. How do I mine that experience to improve how I do my job? So that was really emerged from the research we did and all the notes we had, sitting surrounded by paper, which is we were at the time. The messages were sort of emerging towards us from all of the research.
The thing that struck me about Arrive, Survive, and Thrive is how it's been helpful for me when I'm doing coaching work. It allows me to feel comfortable that it's okay in that first set of engagements that you're just really helping the person to settle or to hold their position, to get sort of situated. So it's okay just to be arriving, and it's okay just to be surviving at the beginning or in the medium term. But it also sets a standard. So it's not enough just to arrive. And it's not acceptable, both for the individual or for the organization, if you're not thriving. And so it's been influential on me to realize that you have to take your coachees through that journey, but it's okay if there's a kind of, not a pause, but there's a moment of arriving and sort of surviving, and then let's build from there. That's not to say that these things of vision and strategy are also very important. You need to define those and communicate them. But for me, I found it super helpful.
For people certainly moving into a new role, a structure like this is a shelter against anxiety. If they have a sense of the sort of roadmap, I mean, that's a therapeutic phrase, that a structure is a shelter against anxiety. If you can say, this is the road in some way you are going to be on, we're not going to race through it, we're going to take each stage and you'll spend longer on some than another, but at least they have a sense of, yes, okay, so that's the map. Well, that's helpful to know that. So I think it can actually lessen some of that anxiety and a feeling of, well, where am I now? What do I do now? What's the best thing to tackle here?
I love the idea of the shelter. Thank you. That's a really useful addition. Let's talk a little bit more about how your work overlaps and what it leads you to co-create. Bridget, you've got this psychotherapeutic technique obviously added into all the experience you have of leadership work and coaching. Ian, you're very much someone who tackles uncomfortable truths and creates trust in teams. What does it look like when you intentionally together co-create leadership change?
I think co-creation is interesting because it's something that we see ourselves doing together. So we're part of that co-creation. But for us as coaches as well, I mean, I think co-creation is the essence of coaching, because you are working with someone to co-create the lessons and the learning and the steps forward. So it's natural that in that sort of engagement process, we also co-create with the client. The thing that's really important for me, and something that Bridget's very good at, is making sure you set up the situation and the environment such that people feel comfortable with being pushed gently to disagree or to contribute, and equally not feeling so complacent that they are just there for you to give them the answers and then they'll just pick those up and go through it. So it's important to have that sort of sense of responsibility on ourselves as well as our clients and our coachees, that they need to contribute. Because if it's just hers and our ideas, it's not going to be enough. That co-creation is really key and it's central. But it's important that I think that the client sees the importance of their contribution, which then breeds to this word that I'm always obsessed with, which is engagement. They're really engaged because it's partly they own it.
Recognizing what I don't know when I'm with Ian, and Ian makes it easy for me to say, I don't know, what does that mean? What's that about? So I think the acknowledging my ignorance on certain things, which I know Ian isn't, and using his experience. And I think finding a way of sharing that, where certainly Ian never makes me feel I'm dumb and stupid, but actually values a kind of curiosity. We use each other's backgrounds to not pretend we have it, but to use it and pool it into the mix of what it is we're talking about or designing or the work. So I think in our upcoming podcasts, we've done a lot of that, and it's partly been very enjoyable because of that. And then also two different spans of experience coming together can create something quite new and different. And I think that creative aspect is also part of the huge fun and enjoyment of it. Just realizing, yes, that's really expanded what we're covering here.
Thank you for that, Bridget. And I would actually take a moment just to acknowledge that that's very much the relationship that Antoine and I have. We generate and spark and are open about our huge differences and make them fun and creative. And it sounds as though there's very much the same thing going on in slightly different packages on your side. And it is beautiful when it happens, isn't it? And you can't necessarily prescribe for it, but when you get there, it's something to be treasured.
Partly moving away from the idea that if you don't know something, I don't think it means I'm dumb or stupid. I just think it means I never had to think about that before. So let's do it now. But so often I think working with people who daren't admit that they know something is that they fear it will be a sign that they'll be seen as stupid, inadequate, or why did we hire this person? Remind why they were so good. That's been a great addition, I think, to tell myself, well, I don't have to anymore because I know that if I don't know something, I just ask Ian a question.
Let's look at bigger trends and developments. Bridget, you're the queen of transitions. Ian, you're shifting into a new way of working and advisory and coaching. When you think about who you are and how you're playing, what developments or trends in leadership and learning excite you most for the next decade?
COVID has been a bit responsible for this, but I think it's the way in which workplaces have been shaken up when nobody could go into the office, physically into the office. And that shaking up of physical work has led to a number of different ways, like leading remotely, about having to recognize that there are ways that people can progress in their careers that we have to start thinking about that aren't just about bumping into people around the water cooler. How else do we get to know people when it may be that a lot of people are in the office less than they are out of it? So how do we help leaders to spot talent? How do we help leaders develop people that they may not always be with or have in the same room with them? What are the ways in which that can be thought about as a different kind of leading? It's something about that idea of remote working and also what the impact is then on teams and people's sense of belonging, people's sense of community at a workplace. So I'm not sure I've got solutions to that, but I find it very interesting to explore as issues with leaders that I work with. And actually, when we do explore it, they often come up with their own ideas, which wouldn't necessarily be transferable anywhere, but they would work in their setting. They work, within their context, they work within their culture. I think it's a chance for people to be creative. This hiatus of COVID, I think is a chance for leaders to be much more creative about how they lead and how they show what matters to them.
I was struck by your question because you said trends. And I think it's a tendency for us sometimes to be a little bit negative about, oh, it's just a trend. Oh, it's trendy. And I think we should be a little bit more positive about some of the things we see as trends, because often trends are, I think, a reaction to a context, something that's changing and happening around us. So I think we shouldn't be overly dismissive. Oh, it's just a trend. It's probably an important change at this moment, and we can all miss inflection points. So I think it's very important to not dismiss these things just because it could just be a trend. There's two things I think that really strike me. One is how we're seeing the new generation, and whether it's X or millennial or whatever, because of age and experience, coming up through the organization. And I'm fascinated to see how this generation will operate at a senior level when they find themselves in a set of circumstances which they may have been somewhat dismissive or critical of when they weren't in that situation. So the extent to which can they hold on to their principles or their points of view or their attitude to work and the way that things should be, or will they discover there's a lot of pressures they weren't aware of? And I think that's something that's really interesting. I'm fascinated. We never asked people of my age what we thought when we were 18 and 20 or 25 and 30. So do we have a new generation, or is it just that we never asked the older young generation what their views were? We could all well have wanted to have a more balanced life when we were in our 20s. But anyway, we shall see. So I think that's something to see, is how that changes over time. And the second is around tech, in learning in particular. I'm old school. I always believed that it had to be face-to-face. COVID taught me a big lesson. And I've seen that, particularly in hybrid, a combination of face-to-face really works. But the one thing that has absolutely amazed me is the confidence that less experienced people will take from video-based learning. My example, this is my last son who's in his mid-20s. it was decided it's perfectly okay for him to completely renovate, change toilet, retile and replumb a bathroom based entirely on YouTube videos. It's not so much as, I'm very proud of his skills, but it's about the fact that someone's got that confidence that I will believe in this video and my ability to translate seeing in action to something I can do. And if I go back to one of your earlier questions, seeing people do stuff, behaviors, not words, are what makes a difference. I think the big thing is, how will we see leadership development be affected in the same way if people are able to see videos of people doing it well and in the right way? So it's that incredible ability of people to have confidence based on just a video and to do things which sometimes they shouldn't do, but they can do based on what they've seen.
TED Talks, when they started, they were transformational, and now they've continued, of course, and you can watch those on their channel and on YouTube and so on. But they are like mini lessons, and now a very wide set of topics. But at the time, they were so influential.
Whilst it's important to look at new trends and new ideas, I'm also struck by the number of times that new ideas are actually old ideas, but slightly tweaked. I found myself talking to a client the other day who said, we've got this great new idea. We've decided that we're going to have our corporate university based on the idea of learning with and from each other. And I had to bite my lip because I'm sure that was the same catchphrase or theme that I used when I first moved into running LVMH House back in 2007. So a newish idea, maybe a reheated idea, but it works, so let's make it work.
I think what you're both pointing to is that there is endless inspiration around us, whether we look for it in a YouTube video or somebody's idea that we maybe read about or heard about 30 years ago. And certainly I feel vindicated once again that my love of medical and firehouse dramas is a set of leadership lessons, because it jolly well is, but also, reading a book. It's everywhere if we choose to look for it. And I think that's perhaps the key. There's such a rich assortment of places that we can learn about being human, being creative, being great leaders, even modest leaders, and finding ways to give those who would want to learn and benefit from learning more to want to do that, to bring us back to the pull of learning, is absolutely the key here. And I've loved hearing your different examples. I think this is probably a great point at which to close. So perhaps just before we do that, any last comments from either of you?
I'm going to cheat slightly if I can, because I know that we're running out of time, but you're going to ask us a question about talent and career management. I really wanted to say something about that because one of the things you asked, I think, was, do I see people who are doing it really well? And this is really not meant to be sycophantic because I used to work there, but I have to call out the work that's being done at LVMH now, which does build on the foundations that Antoine started when he was working there as well, in which they are talking about helping and enabling both managers and the talent, the executives, to have this sense of a career compass and providing guidance and support for the manager, for the individual, and transferring that responsibility, not just saying, it's your own career, get on with it, but doing it in such a way that they're giving some support and help. And I think kudos to the current HR leaders, Maud and her team, that they are taking some of those ideas and it takes a long time to make the change. So I think we have to recognize the work that was done by Antoine, people who came afterwards, to really set up this idea that it's okay for individuals to manage their own career, but you need to give them some sense of support and guidance and help. The career ladder used to be literally a ladder, and it was easy to see where you're going. It's now much more like a climbing wall.
Leading is learning. Learning is also leading. And when those two plait together or intertwine, I think there's a chance for anyone to be not necessarily a great leader, and everybody doesn't want that, but to lead and learn simultaneously and then be able to survive, thrive actually, in a very complex world which is full of different anxieties, increasingly non-linear, sometimes incomprehensible actually. How do you come through that and thrive? I would say lead and learn and lead.
Beautiful. On that note, then, we shall close. It's been an absolute pleasure having both of you. Bridget, Ian, thank you so much for coming and generating such a beautiful and creative conversation. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your summer.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.